This podcast is brought to you by Steed Motor Group Claregalway. For your personalised vehicle shopping experience, find out more at steedmotorgroup.ie. So delighted now to be joined by Galway senior hurler Conor Whelan. First of all, Conor, thanks very much for coming on. To start off first, what's it like now being an inter-county hurler around this time of year?
Yeah, I suppose. Thanks for having me on. First of all, yeah, I think I suppose it's a bit more quieter. Obviously, we had a club campaign. Every player, I suppose, moves from the inter-county season almost straight into the club season, and then depending on how successful you are, I suppose, really. So yeah, for myself personally, I suppose we got knocked out. I think probably 5 weeks ago now. So yeah, I had a bit of downtime there and stuff like that. Obviously it's different for the lads, St. Thomas's lads and the Turretmore fellas who are kind of, I suppose their season's gone on a small bit longer. So yeah, I think the training day for being back is the 24th November. So I suppose taking it easy until then, probably.
Yeah, do you tend not to do much now around this time of year, or do you start gearing yourself back up for it?
Yeah, I suppose kind of depends on where you're at. I suppose really, I think if you kind of need to put on some size, I suppose now is probably the time that you can, I suppose, focus on that. You probably wouldn't be doing much running or stuff like that, and I suppose you don't want to be heading back on the 24th. Absolutely, under serious pressure. So, yeah, you'd obviously be tipping away in the gym and doing a few bits on your own and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's very much so at a player's discretion. I suppose really, I think there's any amount of resources there for you if you want, but obviously depending on how far you went with your club and stuff like that, players will have different needs, I suppose, really.
Do you switch off now completely for hurling, or do you still kind of keep your eye on it with the club stuff that's on around this time of year?
No, I'd usually switch off. I wouldn't really be massively into following the club scene, really, to be honest. I kind of drift away from it completely, to be honest. Doing a PhD, so you'd be busy enough doing that, and then obviously life outside it as well. Lots of friends that don't play it as well and stuff like that. So, yeah, I suppose I wouldn't be one that you definitely wouldn't see me in most club games. Anyways, I'd kind of switch off and I suppose take the downtime away from it and spend time doing, I suppose, different things really, maybe playing a bit of soccer and stuff like that. So it's nice to have that time, I suppose, really as well.
Do you feel that's important to do?
I think everybody has a different view on it. I suppose really, like I know some lads go all the way through and they always tip away doing something and they feel that that's what they have to do. But for me personally, I've always felt that the downtime away from it, I suppose, is massive in terms of it's a long year to go from November, hopefully around to the business end of the championship. And yeah, I suppose for me personally, I've always enjoyed being able to get a break away and do some traveling and stuff like that as well. So yeah, that's always kind of been big for me, I suppose.
Just with this, it was the first kind of year you could say as an inter-county player with the split season where you had county and then club. Interesting to know Darragh O'Donovan came out last week and labelled this as propaganda. But what's your own view on the split season at the minute? Do you think it's worked, or do you think there needs to be adjustments, particularly kind of from a inter-county player perspective? You're on the go for quite a while now.
Yeah, to be honest, I think the essence of what Jared Donovan said, I think there was definitely parts of it that he was, I think, right about. I think the likes of your Connor Cooney's or your David Burks or Shane Cooney's, like they've literally been going around the clock for the last 2 years. So I don't think they get much downtime, I suppose, really. And um, yeah, I just think I think the split season, I think the intercounty, I think it's very condensed. Um, I think obviously players want to play more games, but I think it's very, very condensed. And yeah, I think there's definitely room in terms of tweaking the scheduling a bit and giving more, I suppose, recovery period between games and stuff like that. And I suppose allow players the opportunity to, I suppose, take a breather afterwards. I think that's definitely, um, I just don't really see what the absolute panic is about having it finished by July. I think that's I don't really fully get that. And I think the build up to an Ireland final definitely deserves at least 3 weeks. I think, and then having the football on the week after, I think I think such a good spectacle that it usually is, it almost gets lost by Tuesday of the following week, and then maybe sometimes takes away from the coverage for the All Ireland football final. So I think there's definitely something there in that terms. I think, yeah, look, I suppose it's a very complex argument. I suppose really, I think there's no right or wrong answer. I think every player probably have different views, I suppose.
You just think there's not enough much of a gap between the games? Like, is it very demanding as players?
Yeah, I think it is very demanding. But I think it's very condensed, but it's just I'm not sure as to why exactly it is so condensed. And then obviously you have the issue with the league as well that's kind of lost, has lost, I suppose, its weight, I suppose, really in ways, because the intercounty season is so condensed that you're already playing so many matches that the league, I suppose, isn't what it used to be, I suppose. So that's obviously an issue as well. So I suppose the league issue adds into the championship scheduling issue in terms of there being so many games in the championship. So that's a, a major issue as well, I suppose, really. But look, I don't think we're going to figure them all out here.
That's for sure. And before you get into a bit of your career and goals year last year, are you enjoying the way hurling's being played at the minute?
Um, yeah, I think I've always kind of enjoyed the way hurling's been played. I suppose, really, I think I don't really read too much into the game is. I suppose like the game is evolving, obviously, and teams are doing different things, but that was kind of always the way, really. I suppose. I think, yeah, I think being able to adapt to any situation, I think is I suppose part and parcel of being an inch-county hurler. And I think for me, enjoyment would be a huge facet of the game for me. And if I wasn't enjoying it, I probably wouldn't play. So, yeah, look, I obviously enjoy it, and I'm very, very lucky, I suppose, to be able to do it as well. So yeah, I suppose that's to answer your question, I suppose, really.
You quite often play your predominantly you're hurling for goal in the inside line. Sometimes you can have a man in beside you. Other times you can be alone and you're nearly against two or three defenders. How much of a challenge, particularly at inter-county level, is that?
I think games take on a life of their own, I suppose, really. And the way the game is gone, you're kind of adapting depending on the team you're playing. And I think within the context of a game, I suppose you probably never really spend 70 minutes inside with 2-on-1. You probably go through passages of play where you're probably trying to, I suppose, condense it at the back, and I suppose kind of trying to hit them on the counter up front and stuff like that. And look, I suppose that's your role in the team, and I suppose anything you can do to, I suppose, help the team to get across the line. I suppose it's not something that I really think about too much. I think you just go and do your job, and hope that brings you across the line, I suppose, really.
You've been in the goal panel since 15. It's probably hard to believe you've been there for 8 years now on the go, going into your 90th year. Is
10th,
that 10th,
10th
is
year.
it? 10th,
Yeah.
is it? Is that
Yeah.
hard to believe?
Yeah, time is definitely flying past. I remember in 2015 when I started out, I was in the Connemara Coast Hotel. I was just called into the panel, and we were getting, I think, dinner or maybe breakfast or something over there with the Galway team. I think it was before the semi-final against Tip, maybe. And Fergal Moore told me that it's going to fly by, and I was thinking, what's he raving about? But Yeah, he was right. It just flies by. One season leads into the next, and especially if you have a short season, the likes of 19 there, 2021, those seasons just, I suppose, fly by, and yeah, it just seems like yesterday, to be honest. But I suppose I've been very, very lucky with injuries and stuff like that as well. I've only missed one game, I think, in that 9 years, and that was against Westmeath last year. So yeah, I suppose I've been very, very lucky in ways. But yeah, it's just absolutely flown by, really.
You're only 17 at the time, then getting called into the senior panel. But when you start off at 17 to what your role is now to probably one of the more senior players and one of the leaders in the group, how did you find that change of role from starting out to now?
Um, yeah, I think someone's position on a panel or on a team or a squad kind of evolves over time, anyways. And yeah, I suppose coming through as a young lad, you kind of have a free role, I suppose, really. And yeah, you're very much just enjoying what you're doing, I suppose, really, and trying to contribute to the team. And then I suppose over time, as you have leaders that move on, and the likes of Joe and Aidan Hart and Johnny Cohn and different lads like that, I think, I suppose it's probably your responsibility, I suppose, to I suppose show the younger lads coming through what the standards are and what's expected and stuff like that. So I think it's just something that kind of happens naturally. Like we've lots of leaders inside the group there, young and old, and even the likes of Darren Morrissey, who's been in the panel for 6 years now. Like he's considered a leader. I think he's only still 24. Like, so yeah, look at it. I don't really read too much into it. I suppose really, I think you just try to, I suppose, leave it in a better place than when you came in, and try to, I suppose, show the things that were shown to you as well, I suppose, really.
And where do you feel now you're at as a group? Last year, obviously, you just came up short against Limerick in the All Ireland semi final. It's the second year in a row that's happened. Every team's going after trying to chase Limerick, but they've just shown their class over the last few years. Where do you feel you're at as a group now with going?
Yeah, I suppose when you look back on any season, I suppose there's always what ifs, I suppose, really. And obviously the Leinster final, you come within the puck of a ball of, I suppose, being in All Ireland semi final and being Leinster champions. And I suppose you look back, having not won anything in Leinster and having been unsuccessful in the All Ireland, I suppose you have to look at that and say that you failed, I suppose, really. And yeah, I think, look, it doesn't really matter whether you came second or came last, really. I suppose, really, you probably end up getting the same thing. So I think for Galway, I suppose, as a group, I think, we've had a lot of success underage. And I think I've spoken about this in the past about us bringing young players through. And I suppose the level that it's gone to now, and, expecting the young players are going to come through and just, I suppose, make the step up. It's a very, very hard thing to do. And I suppose, we have lots of talented young players there, and I suppose guiding them through, and I suppose trying to help them make that step, and then I suppose becoming consistent and stuff like that. So I think, as a group, there's lots of talent there, but there's lots of other talented teams as well. And yeah, I suppose, look, at you're probably looking at aiming to try and win a Leinster championship, I suppose, really, and that's I suppose the first point of call, and then seeing where it goes from there, I suppose, really.
Why do you think that step up is so big at the moment for younger players to come through?
I think there's a lot of factors to it, to be honest. I think I was reading a report there that the average age for making it through is 23 now. And the average career has almost gone down. I think it's gone down to like 7 or 8 years now. So I think there's a lot of factors, really. I think obviously conditioning is a massive side of it. I don't think them changing the rules has helped matters either. I think going from under 18 to under 17 and going from under 21 to 20 has meant that, I suppose, if the average age for breaking through was 23, and you're losing a year from under 21, I think that's probably going to make life harder in terms of making that transition as well. And I suppose you have to understand that players are going from, playing underage hurling regardless of how high a standard it is, to play an adult hurling, playing against men, competing against lads the size of Garage Mac or Dahi Burke and stuff like that. And I think that's a big step up physically. But I also think technically and from a skill set perspective and psychologically as well, I suppose it's definitely bringing different challenges that players, I suppose, haven't experienced before. And I suppose they're not being exposed to adult hurling until after minor now, which is probably another part of the puzzle as well. So
Yeah, it definitely does feel like it's a big step up at the minute. But on going last year, going in at half time against Limerick, how were you feeling as players?
yeah, sure. Obviously you're I suppose aware that you're in a good position, but if I went in at half time in games and that was the final score, I think I think I'd have a lot of success. So I suppose you always kind of know that particularly with Limerick, there's a bigger challenge coming, and I suppose they just started very strong the second half and took the wind out of our sails. And momentum is a very, very funny thing in sport, that when you have it, I suppose it's almost a superpower. And when you're fighting against it, I suppose it's very, very difficult to break that trend. And look, I suppose I haven't looked back at it yet, but I'm sure there's things there in the second half that that we probably didn't execute to the level that we would have liked to, which probably coincided with them picking up some easier scores and building on that momentum as well. So look at it. I'm sure there's a multitude of factors, I suppose, really.
How difficult is it when they just get into that flow to try and stop them?
It's very, very difficult to stop any team, I think, really, to be honest. Over the years we've played lots of games where I suppose, against Limerick, I suppose this year, we played against Waterford below in Walsh Park in the league one year, where we had the wind in the first half and we were flying it, and then they started tacking on a few scores with the wind in the second half, and all of a sudden they just completely, I suppose, shifted the power of the game. So it's I suppose it's not a new issue, but it's just Limerick seem to, I suppose, be very, very good in the second half, and I suppose that's where teams seem to be falling down. And I suppose that's the challenge for the likes of ourselves and Kilkenny and Clare and these other teams, that they came up short. I suppose it's always fine margins, I suppose, really.
Are teams getting closer to them in your view?
That's it's quite difficult to say, I suppose, really. Like Clare have been close the last 2 years. We were closer the year before. But still, you're not getting across the line. So, it kind of brings you back to one of the first things I said, in terms of it doesn't really matter how close you come to the line if you're not crossing the line. It's and you have to give Limerick massive credit as well. For, I suppose, digging out the win and stuff like that. So, I suppose it's on the rest of the teams to try and, I suppose, turn the tide, I suppose, really.
That Kilkenny Leinster final was a really difficult result, considering Killian Buckley's goal right at the death. But for you, I'd say that interview was up there with one of the most difficult.
There's definitely a couple of places I would have rather to have been, but I suppose, look, it's one of those things in sport. It's never over until the final whistle. And we had a couple of chances, I suppose, to push it to a 3-point game or push it to a 4-point game, and we didn't do that. And look, at obviously the goal at the end is one of those low percentage things that'll happen. But at the end of the day, I think the learning from that, obviously there's massive learning from the last sequence of play. But I think, from, I suppose, when you have your foot on the neck of an opponent, I suppose, to hit that killer blow to push to 3 points or 4 points, I suppose that's probably one of the main takeaways from that as well. And I suppose, look, there's some things that you can't explain in sport, really.
Just during that game, Jackie Turtle's comments, obviously, where he refers to you as a one-trick pony, which is just ludicrous. I think, as Joe Canning was putting it, a one-trick pony who scores 1 3, it's all right. But did you use that, or did you pay any attention to it at all?
No, so that would have been half time in the Leinster final. So
Yeah.
I obviously would have had a few messages from a few of the boys and stuff like that afterwards. But no, I wouldn't really read into that too much, to be honest. Obviously, everyone's entitled to their opinion, and yeah, I suppose Jackie's point of view wouldn't be too high up on my list of priorities. So yeah, look, I think it's not the first time that we got criticised or called out or stuff like that. So I think when you're in the shop window, I suppose you're susceptible to being, I suppose, criticised and judged, and some people will think you played well and some people didn't and stuff like that. But that's just part and parcel of the game, I suppose, really, and that's something that wouldn't really phase me too much, to be totally honest.
When you talk there about not paying attention to comments and stuff, is it like for yourself during the intercounty season, would you like to be away from people who say, like, would you not like to talk about hurling when you're in the height of it?
Well, I don't be on social media, so I don't. I kind of shut away. I'm kind of shut out from all that. It's just something I've always kind of done.
Has that been from a particular stage or just you?
Kind of from January onwards, I don't really be honest. I don't really be on Twitter or Instagram or stuff like that. I just don't, or Facebook. I don't really. I just don't think it really. I don't think I really need to be subjected to, I suppose, all those opinions and views. And yeah, I suppose you probably just try to keep your circle small. And obviously, anyone you meet, I suppose they have their opinion and they have the answers for you. So, um, but yeah, it's a bit of crack as well. And um, I think in Galway, I think the GA is massive, and I think it's a great thing to have for people, and even back to during COVID, like when people didn't have that, and yeah, it's I think it's one of those things you just tip around, and if you meet somebody, you have a bit of a chat about it or whatever, but yeah, you just be very much kind of focused on your own game and what you're doing yourself, and yeah, I wouldn't really be reading into it too much. I had a fella come here the last day. He was delivering food to the house there, and he seemed to have the answers from the Limerick game anyway. So I wouldn't be reading too much into it, I suppose, really.
You talked about in that Kilkenny interview after the game that this Galway group is a resilient group and they'll go again. And you showed that this year against Tipperary, and that's probably one of the games you look back on with pride. But that's a sense I get from all you as players that you feel there's something in this group.
Yeah, I think obviously the Leinster final, had you got across the line, you'd probably be viewing it differently. But yeah, there was no doubt in my mind, I suppose, really that the group was going to bounce back. We have an awful lot of experience in that group and an awful lot of talent. And yeah, I suppose when you're looking at the likes of Dahi Burke and Carl Mannion and Joe Cooley and these guys, I think there's no doubt in your mind that I suppose in 2 weeks' time that you're going to go and put in a performance. And I think that's something that we did as a group. And I think from that, I suppose there's probably something that you can take from that. Obviously we came up short against Limerick, and I think there's massive, I suppose, scope for learning that. And yeah, I think that performance is probably, and stages of the Leinster final performance is probably what you're taking out of last year, and I suppose trying to build more consistency into that, and trying to you're obviously never going to get the complete performance, but I suppose we set parameters in terms of the level of performance. And I think at stages against Kilkenny, at stages against Tipperary, and at stages against Limerick in the first half, and that's what you're trying to build on, but you're trying to build it into a more consistent performance, I suppose, really.
Is that for you the biggest thing Galway need to improve on for 2024?
As in,
Consistency.
I don't really agree with that narrative, really, to be honest. I think, when somebody says that a team is inconsistent, there's no team that goes out there and gives a complete performance for 70 minutes. So, I think the biggest thing you have to look at is probably in terms of performance is minimizing the time when a team has their purple patch, the damage that they do to you. And I think that is probably what I would look at more so than that word consistency. I think, learning how to, I suppose, shut down or minimize a team when they have their purple patch and limit the damage they do, so that when you have your purple patch, I suppose that you drive on and push on to win the game, and I suppose put the game beyond. I suppose that Leinster final is probably your case in point. I suppose really any time that we, I suppose, went through a phase where we started to put scores on the board and scored a goal and stuff like that, and then I suppose we allowed Kilkenny to instantly strike back, scoring a goal or scoring a goal and 2 points and stuff like that. I think that's almost the learning as opposed to, consistency. I don't really think that you're going to be consistent for 75 minutes, but I just think being able to maximize your purple patch in terms of taking your chances, being ruthless, and then I suppose trying to shut down the opposition and limit them to when they're on their purple patch, I suppose, really.
And what has Henry brought to the table?
Yeah, obviously, look at he's someone who you grew up, I suppose, watching and playing the game, and
Were you
you know,
shocked at the start when he was announced as goal manager?
yeah, yeah, you were, yeah. Like the players didn't have any idea. I met somebody there a couple of weeks ago that told me that they met me and that the day before it was announced, and they could tell that I knew something, but nobody actually really knew anything. So yeah, we were obviously shocked. There wasn't any, I suppose, obvious candidate at the time, and yeah, it was a nice surprise to get, I suppose, really. And from a forwards perspective, obviously, he's obviously somebody who you can relate to, and yeah, I suppose it's been a very enjoyable last 2 years, and happy that he's back again, and happy to have Eamon O'Shea on board as well, and yeah, I suppose looking forward to it.
Does that excite you as an inside forward? Because we've all heard in the past how much the ex-Tipperary forwards have talked so highly about him.
Yeah, obviously it would. Yeah, I think Seamus Cannon mentioned him in his statement as well, and I suppose that's a testament to the work that he's done with Seamus, and yeah, looking forward, I suppose, to work with him and having him on board. And he's a massive addition. I suppose the fact he lives in Salt Hill probably makes it easier for him, and the fact he has a son on the panel as well makes it even easier. So yeah, we'll be looking forward to it.
And just before we do finish on the hurling talk, because there is obviously a lot more to you than just Conor Whelan, the hurler. But do you set any individual aims now for the season ahead?
We haven't brought ourselves around that yet. Now I think we'll
Is
be
that
taking.
something you do?
Um, not It's probably not something I do. You'd probably look back at the season, and I suppose from an objective perspective, and I suppose look at the team, and then look at, I suppose, your performance within the team, and I think every player has areas where they can improve on all the time, and I think it's something that you're told since you're a kid is to always try to be improving and developing things and getting better. And yeah, you'd obviously be, I suppose, trying to develop and push on again for next year, and I suppose you're always trying to get to the next level, I suppose, really.
And do you feel you can win the All Ireland this year?
Um, yeah, to be honest, I wouldn't be part of a panel if I didn't believe that we could go and win the ultimate prize. I think you know there's a lot of things we have to work on as a group, a lot of things we have to work on as individuals. But yeah, I think targeting the Leinster Championship and taking it from there, I suppose, really.
Absolutely. It's going to be an interesting year ahead. Just to bring in some of your own work you're doing now, you're obviously doing a PhD in mental health down in Cork. Firstly, how did that come about?
Um, yeah, it's kind of a complicated story, I suppose, really, but And yeah, so I would have been a teacher in Colossawer and Ballygar for 4 years. And then just I decided that I wanted to do a PhD, and I suppose mental health was something that I kind of was always passionate and interested in. So I kind of decided that I was going to explore, I suppose, how I was going to do it. So I was originally going to do it on the challenges for post-primary students, and then I decided I was going to focus on third level students. And then I suppose from there, I rather than looking at the problems, I kind of wanted to look at a kind of solutions based approach. So I then decided in the middle of that I was going to look at student athletes, and the mental health and well-being challenges they had. And then in the middle of that, I decided that I was going to look at GAA players. So been looking at GAA players now the last while, and I suppose exploring, I suppose, the challenges that elite GAA student athletes have in terms of balancing a dual career. So I think there's been a study done that they equate roughly 60 plus hours a week between being a student and an academic. So yeah, I'm hoping to collect data on that in January, and I suppose get a better understanding of, I suppose, the challenges that they have and how it impacts their mental health and well-being, I suppose, really.
And for people who aren't aware, like, what's the kind of work involved in this process for you?
Yeah, so it's probably a 4 year process. So year one, you kind of go out and you explore loads of literature, and you kind of figure out what's been written in the field, and kind of criticize and analyze the different content, and what's strong about that paper and what's weak, and what method do they use and stuff like that. And after a year, then you kind of need to have nailed down an idea of, okay, so these 10 or 15 people have looked at mental health and well-being in athletes. There could be anything from studies in America all the way around to New Zealand, Australia, back to Ireland, and then you have to identify kind of an area where your study is going to be different to the rest of them. So it's like your unique selling point or a unique angle. And then you've basically got to construct how you're going to go and do it. And then you have to go and do it, which is year 2/year 3, and then you have to write it all up, I suppose, and try and publish it, and present your findings, I suppose, really.
What's been the biggest eye opener so far?
In terms of what I've learned, I suppose I've every day you're learning. I think the biggest eye opener, I suppose, really is from my perspective, has been the amount of student athletes that identify as being an athlete as opposed to being a student. The amount that are willing to, I suppose, sacrifice their academic career, get average grades in order to be successful in their chosen GAA sport, even though there's no prospects of going professional. So when you're comparing it to all the other models, you're comparing it from the NCAA, which is the American one, or the Australian Institute. Theirs are all aimed at the prospect of going professional, even as far as rugby. And the GAA student athletes are doing the same thing in the GAA, but they never have the prospect of going professional. So what you're ending up with is I suppose, a lot of students that end up, I suppose, in careers that they probably didn't want to be in, or that it fits around their, I suppose, their chosen sport and career, which is either hurling or football or ladies football or camogie. So that's been interesting. I think in terms of personally speaking, I think the levels of academic writing and research and the time it takes and stuff like that. Anyone you meet thinks that I'm Van Wilder and I'm in college for the last 9 years, living the dream here and partying all the time and living the dream. But I don't think it really fits in as well as that now. To be totally honest about it.
You're obviously been doing this all year round, considering all the writing and everything that's involved. But just on that, you talk about their GA players and average grades and stuff like that. it's very hard for the GA players to be putting everything into it on top of college. It's kind of very hard to see outside that bubble, so it probably doesn't come as a surprise to you.
Yeah, it doesn't come as a surprise to me, and to be honest, I can resonate with a lot of it. Like I'm not standing here saying Jesus, it's absolute madness. Like I've been there myself. Like I know myself that when I was in it, that I was just thinking like, I'm hurling away with Galway here and I'm happy out. But yeah, I think there probably comes a stage where you kind of realize that, I'm not so sure, is this exactly what I wanted to do? And it's not that it's not that I didn't like teaching or anything, but it's just, it kind of just happened as I was like, I'm not sure is the issue. I'm not exactly sure is the issue just a lack of guidance, or is it, is it education, or is it, I don't know, like I just don't know. Do people realize, I suppose, are they in a position to be able to make a decision at that age when they finish an undergraduate course? Do you know what you really want to be? I'm not sure. It's obviously interesting, and I suppose my study is hoping to explore, I suppose, exactly how it plays out and how people arrive at their decisions and stuff like that. And yeah, I suppose identity is kind of a funny one because, obviously, student athletes' identity will fluctuate around the time of exams and around Fitzgibbon. And but I suppose the biggest eye opener has been the amount of time that they're actually given to, like I was reading one report there where some students end up representing 6 different teams a year. Like someone who's playing under 20 hurling is playing for their county, their club, is playing Fitzgibbon for their college, is on a senior panel, is on their senior club team. Like that's 5 teams straight off the bat. Like, and that's over the course of a 12-month period. Like, it's just hard to see. Like, it's obviously going to have negative effects. Like, really, like.
You probably experienced that 5 or 6 different teams, have you?
Yeah, I would have. I think when I was coming, so I started playing for my club at the age of 16. So I think one year we played under 21 county, senior club, senior county, Fitzgibbon. So that was 5 teams. And to be honest with you, I think that the colleges competition has been completely cast aside. So, like I was almost transported in the week of a match, like, and playing with players like I didn't really know the players, like, which is, awful disappointing because Fitzgibbon is so much crack, like, and you had one year there where you really got to integrate with the group, but other years, like, you're just transported in and you're just, you're trying to please your Fitzgibbon manager, and then you're, keeping your senior manager happy, and you go back playing under 21 for your club. And that time the club season was in the middle of the inter-county. So, your inter-county manager doesn't want you going to your club. And they used to put an under 21 fixture then in the middle of it all. And it's just like, it's just didn't make any sense at all. But it's still a massive issue. Like,
Can there be anything done there from your study or just even from
I don't know. Like, there's obviously the GPA are looking at moving the Fitzgibbon to before Christmas, which I suppose will be an interesting one. There's talks of scrapping the preseason competitions as well. There's obviously two sides to that coin. There's players that want to play for their county and get the opportunity to put themselves in the shop window, and then there's probably players that have been around a bit longer that I suppose don't really want to play preseason competitions. And then there's Fitzgibbon players that I suppose are looking at the likes of, say, Donal O'Shea last year, who was playing Fitzgibbon on a Wednesday and playing for Galway on a Sunday, and back playing Fitzgibbon the following Tuesday. And yeah, obviously Colin O'Rourke came out and was very critical of it, and I think it's probably again a scheduling issue. So yeah, I think there's lots of moving parts to that story, and I suppose mine is just looking at student athletes and I suppose where their mental health and well-being fits into that whole picture. I suppose really.
just on the mental health and well-being aspect, this is probably something that you probably examine more as a group now, even with the Galway senior hurlers compared to when you started out.
Yeah, I suppose to a certain extent. I think the average person's awareness of mental health is definitely higher than I suppose 10 years ago. I think that's there's no disputing that, I suppose, really. I think there's way more knowledge out there that people can access. But the biggest issue continues to be the services, I suppose, really, which I suppose are difficult to access through the public services system. So, yeah, I think players are definitely more informed. I think society is more informed. But I suppose the methods of what you do with that information and how that, I suppose, turns into something tangible is probably still something that, I think I was at a conference 3 or 4 weeks ago, and someone who was speaking there said that playing elite level sport is actually bad for you physically and mentally, like, which is probably the first time that I ever heard that being said. But there's no doubt that playing elite level sport places fundamental challenges on you physically and mentally. And I suppose different players have different ways for managing that. And I suppose it comes down to having that support structure around you and having your family and friends and stuff like that. And yeah, look, I think there's definitely loads of knowledge out there, but I just think people probably have different and various ways in terms of I suppose dealing with that, I suppose, really.
Is there a psychologist you would use in the hurling setup to go and talk to, or would you use it yourself or anything?
No, I kind of focus on my own game and my own, I suppose, my own space, really. And I think going back to our conversation with student athletes, I think a lot of it is experience as well. And I suppose I've been lucky that I've been around a while, that I suppose that there's going to be highs and lows. And I think being able to manage that and being able to situate yourself somewhere in the middle, that when things are going well, not to get too carried away, and when things aren't going well, that it's not the end of the world. And that sounds like a very, very simple statement to say, but if I'm 19 or 20, talking to Conor Whelan back then, I think it's a very different conversation. You'd obviously be down and out, and because you're putting so much time into it. And I suppose back to our conversation about people sacrificing their academic career. If you're sacrificing your academic career and you go out and you have a bad game, it seems like the end of the world, because I suppose that's where you're putting all your time, I suppose, really.
Did the mental health kind of aspect and everything really come to life for you, say? Because I know you've talked about it where you've tragically lost your cousin Niall Donoghue to suicide, obviously. But is that when it really came to light? Because I know you talked and you said at that time you didn't really know even what suicide was.
Yeah, it's definitely a factor, I suppose, in the whole story. I think back then, I think society was way less informed in terms of mental health, and there's very much a stigma there around mental health. And obviously, I think there's still a good bit to go for that conversation, but I think we've developed an awful lot as a society. And it's obviously something that you'd like to look at, and I suppose try and do something, I suppose, meaningful in that area. Obviously, Niall's a massive factor in that, but I have internal motivations from it as well, having, I suppose, been on the ground and seeing firsthand people being affected by mental health issues, I suppose, really. So I think there's a multitude of factors, really. And yeah, I suppose it's something that I've been very, very passionate about and interested in. And I thoroughly enjoy learning about it and understanding it, I suppose, really from a much deeper perspective, I suppose, than a baseline level, I suppose, really.
Is there conversations you've had with different Galway hurlers? I know there's not a lot of Galway hurlers left that Niall would have started out with, say, but say even the hurlers that have been there more recently retired. Would have been able to have conversations with them about Niall and what happened? Because everything, there was obviously a lot for the players to take around that time.
Yeah, I would have chatted to, like, Davy Burke would have probably been one of his best friends. He'd be one of my close friends as well. And Aidan Hart would have grown up with him. He's from Gort, neighbouring parish. He'd be one of my good friends as well. So yeah, you'd have had lots of conversations over the years, and just, I suppose, he could come up in conversation at any stage, I suppose, really, and you just love hearing stories about them. And I suppose after the All-Ireland final in 2017, holding that flag with Joe was a special moment. And, even hearing that Davy Burke went up to his grave the night before the All-Ireland, and, left a couple of hurling balls on his grave, and then went out and gave an exhibition in Croke Park. I suppose it's just small things like that. I suppose really that there's that saying that the memories stay on, and yeah, I think hearing I suppose different stories than the ones you're used to hearing about him. I suppose is a nice thing, and yeah, I suppose it's something that has probably brought you closer to some of your teammates as well. Having known Niall and being his cousin and stuff like that as well. I suppose.
Do you think about him a lot when you play hurling?
I think he's always at the back of your mind there somewhere. Definitely, yeah. I think it's something that gives you lots of perspective as well. I think sometimes when we play sport, we think it's the be all and end all, and the sun's not going to come up tomorrow. But unfortunately, there's bigger issues out there in the world as well, and yeah, I suppose it's always good to have him there with you, and knowing that I suppose no matter what happens, life is going to go on, and yeah, I suppose he passed away so young. I suppose you kind of look at it and say like, you need to have. I suppose you try and bring that perspective with you towards everything. I suppose in life, really.
You used the word there, perspective, in your own career and in hurling at the minute. Do you think you've changed from when you started out? Would there be an obsession to now having a kind of perspective and not, I suppose, hurling not being the end of the world or anything?
Um, yeah, I think I definitely wouldn't say I was obsessed as a player coming through. I think I think at times I was very much happy-go-lucky. But yeah, I think as you go on through the years, and I suppose particularly when it's not going well, and when you're not being successful as a group, I suppose the answer is always more and more and more. And yeah, I suppose over the last couple of years, you kind of realise that I suppose that I suppose there's life outside it as well, and you've seen players pass through and players step away, and you've seen their lives go on as well and stuff like that. So I think the realization that it's going to end at some stage, and enjoying it, and I think enjoyment is probably the most important word in the dictionary for me in terms of it, in terms of enjoying what you do. And you know I suppose with Anthony you can look at it with the perspective that it's awful tough, and people say you're sacrificing this and that and other, but the other end of the spectrum is you're absolutely blessed to be able to do it, and just to go out and enjoy it. And I think that's very much where I'm situated at the moment, that I don't think the sacrifices are as much when you're enjoying doing something, and I suppose you're able to do it, and that's it, I suppose, really.
And just before we finish, Connor, just a few quick fire questions for you. To date, who would you say has been the best hurler you've played with?
Oh, that's a tough one now. That's a tough one. The best hurler I've played with, I would say, oh, it'd probably be a toss of a coin between Joe Canning and Cathal Mannion. Joe's vision was just insane, the things he could see. And then Cathal Mannion's technical ability is just outrageous. But I'll have to go with Cathal, I suppose, really, because I'll be relying on him. So I'll have to give him the tip of the hat for that one.
And your toughest opponent to date?
Toughest opponent, yeah, there's definitely been a few. Hugh Lawler is obviously a very tough opponent. He's fast and agile. Sean Finn as well. Yeah, I'll probably go with Hugh Lawler for that one, I suppose.
The biggest influence on your career?
Biggest influence on my career, I would definitely say, is my family. My father has taught me, I'd say, every skill in the book that I have. My mother has always kind of been supporting me no matter what, and I grew up playing against my brother in the lawn. So, he was definitely an influence in terms of there was no such thing as a ref back then. So, and my sister as well is absolutely mad into it. So, yeah, I think my family has probably been the biggest influence.
And what's been the highlight of your career so far?
You'd have to say winning the All Ireland in 2017 feels like an age ago now, probably because it is. But yeah, I suppose you're chasing something that you'd heard about. Really, you'd heard lots of, I suppose, mythical stories about it, and what Galway was like when they did it. And my father would have, I suppose, been young at that time, and he'd be telling you stories about it, and the success they had and stuff like that. So I think finally doing that, I suppose, and it's probably something that you can't really appreciate until you finish playing. But yeah, it's definitely been the highlight so far, anyways.
Favorite place to play?
Favorite place is definitely Crow Park, anyways, for sure.
Well, that's all we do have time for today on our podcast. A massive thank you to Connor for coming on.